everyone to the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing in the Wellbeing series. As Molly said, I'm Dr. Mary Jo Kreitzer, the founder and director of the center. For more than 2 decades, we've been advancing health and well-being in people, organizations, and communities. We are so delighted to be hosting as our well-being speaker today, Dr. Monica Sharma, who will be sharing her presentation, Ethical Leadership, the Fractal for Equitable Enduring Change. Several years ago, I ran across Dr. Monica Sharma's book, Radical Transformational Leadership, Strategic Action for Change Agents. I was so impressed with the book that I bought multiple copies and encouraged many on the center team to read it. And we actually even had book discussions. While aspirational, the book was also entirely practical and very action-oriented, as it focused on strategies to transform unworkable systems and norms to solve problems. At this time on the planet, we desperately need approaches that will unite us and that embody 3 values that Monica talks and writes about: dignity, compassion, and fairness. Dr. Sharma is trained as a physician and epidemiologist. She worked for the United Nations for 22 years. As Director of Leadership and Capacity Development for the United Nations, she designed and directed programs for whole systems transformation worldwide. Currently, as an international expert on leadership development for equitable, sustainable change, she works globally with the United Nations, universities, management institutions, governments, NGOs, businesses, media, and other organizations. She has published and presented over 250 articles in journals and international forums. In 2009, she received the Spirit of the United Nations Award, given to a person whose work is an expression of the core principles, spirit, and vision on which the United Nations was founded. So Dr. Sharma suggested that we begin the webinar today with just a very brief moment of silence. And so after this brief moment of silence, I'll welcome Monica, and then the lecture will begin. Welcome, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, it's such a privilege, actually, to speak to you, to speak to all of you. And I'll begin with setting the stage. And to me, it's not a stage, really. Maybe the world is a stage. What do I mean when I use the word radical? So the word radical in common parlance is often interpreted as radicalize. But in this work, radical is my ability to touch the root of my being, the root of your being. And this is the space that has created fantastic movements in the world through civilizations. And so the root of comes from a mathematical term. Radical means root of. And then the word transformational, because everybody uses the word transformation. Every politician uses it. Every management consultant uses it. But in this work, it means something very specific. What it means is my ability, your ability, to create new formations that are equitable and enduring, and that they are based on universal values of dignity for everyone, equity, and compassion. Justice without compassion can be very harsh. So that's what transformational means. And what does leadership mean? So leadership in this work is not about the CEO. It's about everybody. It's not about the Nelson Mandelas, yes, of course. It's about the Rosa Parks. It's about everyone, ordinary people like me, doing extraordinary things. It's about my and your ability to create a new future. Leadership in this work is also the ability to create leaders around me. And that leadership is my ability to generate new leaders, not because they have to learn from me, but because I create the platform for them to manifest their full potential. Leadership is also, another definition could be creating a new future. It also is about deep listening, responsible speaking at the same time, and our ability, my ability to change unworkable social narratives. So here today, we are speaking about you and me, your radical transformational leadership and mine. And it's about also the fractal. So what does the mean? And we will do a little more work on, talk a little bit more on what's a fractal. Again, a word out of nature and physics. A fractal is simple. It is a space and are spaces where the same pattern is repeated. And what's that pattern? That pattern is what we are going to explore. So this work is about large-scale movements happening one at a time and working together, a new activism. So Mary Jo used the word values that I had in the book. And I picked that up from learning from other people. So basically, when we look at dignity, I studied the work of Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence. He's also written about ecological intelligence, but emotional intelligence. And basically, what we know is that self-awareness, in his book on primal leadership, self-awareness is the single biggest predictor of effective leadership. And self-worth is a cornerstone. So all of us who work as counselors, who work with other people, we know that fostering my self-esteem is critical for what I do, for how I relate to others. And in this center on spirituality and relationships, that are spirituality in action, the Bakir Center, where Mary Jo is the head, relationships are extremely important. Health, very important. So how do I foster these relationships? I foster them based on my dignity and others' dignity. And this work that Daniel did is seminal for all of us, and most of us know about it. And then equity as a universal value. When Oxfam did a study in the US, they found that 92% of Americans believe in fairness. 92% of Americans believe in fairness. Then how do we tap into that for our next generation activism? What's gone out of sync is another question. And that's reported in a brilliant report, the report that's named Even It Up by Oxfam in 2015. And then compassion. Every culture, the one I was born in India, compassion is named karuna. And we know that compassion is a very strong space. Joan Halifax often talks about, in her work on dying, about soft belly, strong spine. Compassion is a space when my wounded heart of love is broken open and I stand there with courage to create something else. And I will share stories with you. So let me begin. I'll take you around the world, actually. Meaning I'll share stories from around the world. Some of them are in my book and some of them are newer stories because I still work. And the first thing about this work is grounding in my values, yours. But when I use the word values, it actually means different things to different people. So when I was working in Notre Dame Business School and I used the word values, what they were hearing is the value chain of business, value chain in business. So that's not what we mean. In common parlance, when I say the word value, then people think I'm talking about what is important to me. Like I value my time with my family, whatever it is that's important, but that's not what we mean. And then Harvard, the University Harvard did a study around the world. And what they found was when they used the word values, what people understood was cultural norms. A cultural norm can be of different kinds, but a cultural norm is not a universal value. It's unique to that culture. And we'll do a little more discussion on that. And in many spaces, large institutions, there is a mix-up between the universal values and the operational principles of that institution. So let's take Stanford, for example. So one of Stanford's operational principles is to create referral systems with the best technology. Silicon Valley is next door. And is that a universal value? No, it's an operational principle. But too often we mix that up. So in UNICEF, for example, we would say, participation of children is a universal value. No, it's not a universal value. It's a strategic bent and operational principle. Why is it so important to distinguish these two? Because usually people around the world, when we deepen the space, are not about objecting to or having a huge disagreement on dignity matters or equity matters. What they are really having disagreements with are either cultural norms or operating principles. And if we can distinguish this, we can find a very profound space beyond common ground, a space where we operate from the ground of our being. And I think that that's why the word values is so important. And these three intertwined values, they are really intertwined in it. It's not like I wake up on Monday morning and say, today's my dignity day, and tomorrow's my equity day, and Wednesday is my compassion day. These are not compartments. They are part of our integrated, entangled whole. So then, that's the backdrop. And I will begin with a an example of how we use this, the world of values, to transcend our polarized conversations. So this work is about dealing with complexity. And complexity doesn't have to be complicated, because whether I'm ending racism or I am working on reducing poverty and establishing prosperity, these are not simple issues. They are complex issues, but I don't need to make it complicated. And so what we know, and we have evidence for from what we gathered worldwide from 700 projects around the world, we know that this inherent intertwined space of values exists. This work is not about being a leftist or extreme right or center. This work is apolitical, or even better expressed as bipartisan, means all parties are part of this work. It's not about creating ideological divisions. It's about transcending ideology and being able to generate worldviews from who I am. So, story time. So I'll begin from the East Coast, and then we will travel around the world to Europe next. So my first story is out of University of Virginia. And we have a program, we call it RTL, Radical Transformational Leadership, and it's a 9-day program, and it has all the elements of the book in it, and we do it in 3 parts. Why do we do it in 3 parts? Because we focus first very much on who I am and the values I have, and then how do I design, chapter 6 of the book, and then how do I implement, which is the next chapter of the book. And we'll go through that in brief. So we are working in University of Virginia, and one of the male nurses, a wonderful man, Michael, and he's happy to share his story, goes home and he follows he votes for the Democratic Party. In most cultures, we don't say, I am a Democrat, I am a Republican. We just say that I voted for, because that's where I wish to vote. And you don't have to share where you vote, that's confidential. But he says he's, part of the Democratic Party, but his entire family, they are Republicans. And they were sitting around Christmas, and the family was not so pleased with some healthcare, Obamacare. And he said, that's your opinion, and everyone has a way of expressing opinions. But can I ask you a question? And so this work is based on inquiry, not questioning. Inquiry that generates insight, and when I generate an insight, I practice. So story time. And he said to his family, let's stop for a moment, whether we agree or we don't agree. Let's just think, when my nephew, that's your son, if he has an accident on the road and he's 16, do you want people to care for him? They said, but of course. He said, would you want to do that for everyone, son? They said, of course, we care. He said, that's all it's about. Can I just land on my universal values? And Michael says, something deepened. Do I know how to deepen conversation? Something deepened beyond the polarity that came about simply because I am anchored in my greatness, in my values, in his values. So what we do worldwide, is we begin from the space that has no degrees, it has no educational level, it just has the wounded heart of love and a mind that can see from that space, rather than only from knowledge. Not that knowledge is not important, or ideologies that are frameworks for how we look at things. So we begin, and we begin with people discovering the space. And we begin with people articulating that space, because that space exists any which way. It exists in each of us. And the question then is, can I transcend my knowledge barriers and move to a place that is deep and profound and involve everyone in that space? And when we've created strategic action, that's where we've worked from. So let me just show you a couple of slides and then ask you to reflect for 90 seconds. And if you wish, you can just think about it and keep your reflection basic for you to see it again. Or if you want to share it in chat, that's your choice. But let me begin by sharing my screen and rapidly reviewing what we just what I just spoke about. And you will have access to these slides, so there is no need for any of us to take notes. And now, why is it that I can't? I am wishing to create. Now, why does it not go to the beginning? Never mind. And so the word is fractal. That means the pattern you and I can create to have equitable, enduring change manifest with action and results on the planet. And wherever I am locally. Today, whatever I do locally has global reach. We went over radical, our root of our being, transformational, and our leadership. And then we went over what values mean. In this work, values are the ethical foundation. And, different groups think about it differently. And then these intertwined attributes actually are the foundation of universal values for our humanity. And then, of course, we may have a different take on it, and that's fine. And so I wanted to show you one of the most magnificent pieces of art from Marc Chagall in the UN. And he made this, he called it peace, the entangled space of our world, our people, the butterflies, and who we are, nature, ecology, relationships, all in one. And he called it peace, and he dedicated it to Dag Hammarskjöld and all the people who died when their plane was shot and they were killed when they were going to have peace talks in West Africa. So to me, do you know how to take these intertwined attributes and source my and others' inner capacity for strategic results? Do I know how to do that? And so there are 6 steps to know who I am. That's what our work is about. That's in chapter 5. I declare my stand because there is a thing called speech act theory. When I speak, I make explicit what is implicit when I speak responsibly. I know my socialized fears because that's normal, and I'm able to transcend it by getting back to who I am. And that's what the work people do to create spaces that make a big difference. I commit to action, and I know how to source mine and others' universal values for strategic action. So it's not just the backdrop of depth. It is also, how do I take my depth and greatness and manifest it? So courage is not the absence of fear, but it's the ability to act in spite of that butterfly we get. And we do it through mindfulness. We notice, we name it, we let go and release ourselves by being in action. It's like what Chief Seattle said, when you know who you are and your mission is clear and you burn with the inner fire of unbreakable will, no cold can touch your heart, no deluge can dampen your purpose. The Bakir Center is also about purpose, because when I know my purpose, I live from a totally different space. So then, let's reflect together. You may wish to share it. You may wish to just write it for yourself, 90 seconds. What do you care deeply about? What are the universal values that manifest through you for our humanity and planet? Your inner greatness. I will let you know when 90 seconds are over. Okay. That's my alarm, and I'm trying to put it off. And so I'm going to stop share. And I'm going to share a story from Europe. So I work in Norway. Another element that the center works on is, nature conservation, our environment. And so in Norway, I work on climate action with a group. They are scientists, they are business people, they are from government. And I'll quote a story from Norway. So this is Jan Erik, an architect, and he did this work. And at this moment, when we had completed just this part of our work, he said, the biggest issue for us in our architecture, which is eco-friendly, which is very cognizant of labor rights, is to be able to see our work as a manifestation of who we are, not as a profession only, because that's how most professionals look at themselves, but beyond our professional talents, beyond our personality traits, beyond the social dimensions of our work, there is a part in us that is profound. And he's organizing, using the tools that we have, young and not so young in age, entrepreneurs in business, to be able to shape their businesses from a different space. So why do I bring up a business example and Europe? I bring this up because I think this is a trailblazing space, not just for Europe or for Norway, but it's a trailblazer for everyone. And to me, that this work applies not only in our families, as Michael applied it, and he applied it also in his space of work in the hospital. And we can talk more about that, many stories, but it applies in the world of business. So now I'll take you to another exploration. The first exploration is, who are you? Who am I, Monica? So I stand for freedom as mukti, equity and dignity, not only for the world out there, but also for myself, so that I grow. Because in this work, who do you think benefits the most? It's me. I go to bed in peace. So do you, when you manifest your greatness. And so for me, that's the beauty of this work. Now we come to the architect in you. You know, you and I are designers. So we're going to take up two thoughts. One is that of how do I design? Because what I design is what I deliver. If today's world is inequitable, it's because we've designed it that way. Because the rules of the game that are not visible are that way. If we redistributed all the wealth that we have on the planet, then in a very short time, the pyramid of inequity, 3 months, actually, they say, will start because the rules are like that. So then there are 3 thoughts that I want to leave behind with you, and they are in slides. The first thought is what we do and how we design our project, your idea, your function in your workplace, my ability to transform my everyday work. That space is available to all of us at home and in our workplace. It's not that we are incorrect in what we do. What happens is we don't connect the thread in a way that we will have exponential impact. That's the first point. Our strategies are partial. They are not what we call full spectrum. The second point is, we usually focus on a problem, including in management training. And is that important? Of course, it's important. But if we focus on problems alone, we are not going to establish the resilience and the culture, the counterculture that's required to transcend the polarities we have. How come 22,000 people die every single day, mostly children, out of hunger in a world that can feed twice the number of people that we have? So I'm going to take you through these 2 templates. And I'm going to ask you, what do you want to do differently? What do you want to do differently in your activity today? And then I'm going to walk you through systems change, which is part of the same thing, and cultural shifts, and a couple of stories when we walk through that, as we walk through it. So let me share those slides with you. Back again. Share. And we will do the next 2 things together. And I don't know why it always goes to the last slide, but it does. And so let me just go back to where I wanted to start. So the second feature of our work is, you just worked on that, is that you at home, I at home, have a choice to be a unifying architect or have a choice to be having silos in what I do. So as a parent, we normally, let's take parenting and generating equitable change. The first thing in this work is that I use my universal values. That's what we're going to work on for everyone, everywhere. By universal, we mean it's not just for the groups we care about, it's for humanity. Everyone, everywhere. It's a word we use in the UN. So we'll focus on the architect in me, and then we'll speak about activism and mindful implementation. So as I said, it's not that our strategies are right, are wrong. It's just that our strategies are partial. So you take COVID, we have technical interventions, vaccine, masks, distancing. Are they important? Of course. But we also found that certain groups suffered more and that we needed to transform those spaces. And did we do some work on it? Yes. And yet we know that a vast majority have less income today, and a few companies have gained tremendous amount of wealth during COVID times. And then we often focus on our leadership, and is that important? Yes, of course it is. But it doesn't create a space that can actually manifest the changes we wish to see as a whole. So we need to move from partial things. It's not that it's wrong. It's just that we have scatter of projects. So it's your choice. Do you want to have a scatter of projects? I call it projectitis. Or do you want to establish an ecosystem for change? And while we can do that if, and only if, while solving problems, we work on shifting systems and culture based on universal values at the same time. Unfortunately, we do it sequentially. We do not need to do that sequentially. So a conscious full spectrum response means, let me take food. I have hunger. So do I need food? Yes, I do. I do need food. But what's it that in a world that can feed double the population we have, 1 billion people go to bed hungry? So there is something not working in our system or our cultural norms related to food. And then there are underlying factors. So I do wish to point that out for everyone who works on measurement and evidence. We have in our world today considered poverty to be an underlying factor. Poverty is not an underlying factor in a world of abundance. Poverty is a systems defect. And so we need to shape the way we look at metrics, because what we measure is what we move. And then, so there is another thought. So the first thought is it needs to be full spectrum, all the 3 domains. The next thought is I need to distinguish acausal emergent spaces, acausal emergent spaces, which quantum physics does, from the spaces that are our current metrics. We need proxies for that, and the book has examples. And then, do we only focus on solving problems, or do we also create equitable, sustainable change? So we call this the realize and the respond and realize model. So the first thing we do is establish that it's based on dignity, equity, and compassion, or whatever matters to you. This is what matters to me. And it matters to people worldwide, wherever I've worked. I've worked in about 60 countries. So respond to problems. Oh, by the way, over a long period of 40 years. So we need to respond to a problem, whether it's COVID or hunger. But we need to realize full potential, because we need both, and it's not a problem-solving place only. And so during COVID, health and survival, but we need to build resilience at the same time. Today, there's so much talk about individual, collective distress and trauma informed services. Is that important? Of course. But we need to establish well-being, and we need to interrupt isms, racism, classism, anthropocentrism, materialism, so that we can manifest a different set of norms. Violence, the opposite of violence is not nonviolence. It is the establishment of equity and peace. And we need to have anti-racist policies and programs that we need to manifest, like the Equity Manifesto from Policy Link in Oakland, the racial equity and what that means. And the strategies are not the same. That's why this line is broken. The strategies for addressing poverty are different from the strategies of building resilience and addressing prosperity. So what we need to recognize is that this is huge. When we worked in Papua New Guinea, which has a very high rape rate, we said, yes, we need to put in place, law. The law was already in place. We needed education, we needed shelters, we needed hotline, we needed counseling, we needed rehab, but we also needed the icon of a nurturing, modern Papua New Guinean man, not from the US or not from India, their culture, to to create the draw of what's possible by human beings. So I love this quote from Buckminster Fuller: a designer is an emerging synthesis of an artist, inventor, mechanic, objective economist, and evolutionary strategist. So just let's reflect for 90 seconds, and then I'll continue. What do you care deeply about? Your inner greatness. You just did that. What do you wish to see changed? What will you do, or what could you do differently? 90 seconds again. And feel free to share your thoughts. Okay, let's continue. So the unifying architect, that's you, that's me, requires to address systems change, not just systems thinking. And one of the most important things is to recognize, like Donella Meadows did in her work with the Futures Group, that basically all of us are systems thinkers. So what does it really mean? So it is about defining a system in a way that all of us can relate to it, not just as expert systems analysts. And yes, of course, we need them. So for all of us to participate in democracies, we need to demystify theory so that we can be in practice. And as you know, a system is an interconnected, set of interacting, interrelated, interdependent elements, part of a whole. And it has a function and it has feedback systems. And let's say our body has so many systems. But then there is culture. And a lot of our social norms and cultural norms, and this is a dictionary definition, a cultural norms are rules and expectations of behavior and thought based on shared beliefs within a specific culture or social group. And they may be life enhancing, like many practices in many countries on food and parts, or let's say a life-enhancing practice that exists in most of Africa, in the villages and in Africa, not so much in India, where there's a lot of caste divisions. But in Africa, when anyone falls ill in a village, the whole village knows what's happening, and they will cook and they will come and support the person to be. So that's a great, great practice. The US has practices like that. Every culture has life-enhancing practices. And then there are neutral ones, like kids wear jeans worldwide. But I'll focus on the life-diminishing or exploitative ones. And this is story time. So we moved to Europe. And so I'll move now to Africa. And I'll take an example from a person in Ethiopia who was going through this program, and she stood up. And she said, I stand for equality and equity. And we have a practice because they pay a bright price. When the husband died of AIDS, I was working on the HIV/AIDS program. The property is taken back by the man's family, even though the law is different today. And culture prevails. And basically, she stood up the next day and said, we're going to give it all back because it's not equity. It's not equality. And then a few other Ethiopians stood up and said, well, Baal, it's our culture. She said, if I don't transform my culture, who's going to do that? So then my question to you is, what practices that are diminishing or exploitative in the culture that you are, that you will make a difference? And I'll take one from religion, because religion is both system and culture. And I'm working in the Arab states, and I saw Khadija there. When I was working with Khadija, she's also listening in. And we decided to address the religious groups, and she received a prize for it. And the religious groups were working on, they promoted female genital mutilation. And many of the women said that that's not really life enhancing. And we looked at, religious texts. Nowhere did Prophet Muhammad promote that. Nowhere did Jesus and the Bible promote it, yet it was positioned as a religious practice, and it was unclean if we didn't walk through it. And that moment, when the sheikh stood up, the sheikh from the largest mosque in Cairo, stood up and said, I've promoted this. And because I asked a question, you are the mercy of Allah. That's what you said you stand for. And then the priest say, I am the compassion of Christ. And truly, that's how they began. I said, then you are the compassion of Christ, because Christians go through it too, in the Nile region, and now in a lot of other places. I said, you are the mercy of Allah. You are the compassion of Christ. What's missing in this picture? And then there is a reflection. And then the man stands up and says, I'll have a fatwa against this when I go back. And he did. And so did Father from Jordan stand up and said, we are going to train our priests differently from today. They will know it's a life diminishing practice that somehow entered the world of patriarchy and ego. So it works. And it works in very difficult situations. So it's not about incremental change, and none of them were systems analysts or classical systems thinkers. They require to see the capability of activating their mind and making visible what's invisible, the pain, the suffering, and then connect the dots, always grounded in universal value of dignity, equity, and compassion. And if you and I choose to be a systems transformer, we can be that. So then, a 90-minute reflection. Who are you as a radical systems transformer? Good news, when you work with systems change with the conscious full spectrum response model, which we showed you as the 3 circles, conscious full spectrum response model, any one small shift that you make in the middle circle, you're changing the system, you're leveraging change, because it's an interconnected space. What shift do you want to make? From what to what? Who are you having conversations with? At home, in your workplace, in society? And what one cultural piece for the area that you're interested in, any domain? This work is subject agnostic, because these spaces are not tied to a topic. Whatever interests you, 90 seconds. Okay, that's 90 seconds over. So I'm going to move to the last 2 points I wish to share with you. And the last 2 points are related to activism and mindful implementation. And as Daniel Goleman and others say in an article I read, mindfulness without emotional intelligence will not lead to change, and it will not lead to the kind of results you and I wish to see. And it needs to get embedded in the next generation activism. So there's a template we use, and it's in the book, and we call it integrity. Integrity as being whole, not morality, not ethics, though that too may be vital for many. Ethics is. So just 2 thoughts on this and an exploration. What will it mean not only to look at anti-racist work, but also to have racial equity? What kind of activism do we need that is not polarizing, doesn't polarize, but asks the right questions? So there are 6 questions we ask. Whenever we set up strategy, am I my word? Do I deliver on what I plan to do? Because we must be accountable. But not just those. I mean, you can think of Hitler. Was he his word? Yes. Did he deliver on what he planned to do? Yes. And we need a deeper inquiry at the same time. So I inquire into the congruence between the strategies and actions and my universal values. And we learn how to do that. And I speak up and speak out responsibly based on what I stand for. And then I am the change I wish to see, and I am human. So there will be moments that I step out of sync, that I don't keep to my word and I don't deliver. But I notice that without judging myself, without making myself or others wrong. Like Keegan said, Robert Keegan in his work, that a very major skill we need is to move from the culture of blame, either blame myself or blame anybody else, from blame to responsibility. So how do I use tools? So this is one of those tools. And we don't have time to practice the tool itself. It takes a couple of hours. And the second thing we foster very proactively is this is one space. It's not different spaces. It's all together at the same time. I listen deeply. I learn how to stop my mind's chatter, which is why when today Mary Jo began with silence, silence is about stillness. Stillness is about your greatness manifesting without this chatter that carries on like 40,000 thoughts a minute. And to be able to speak responsibly, to be able to shift disempowering narratives. And so I want to go back to this for a second, because I'm going to ask you to reflect on this. What does it mean for activism? What does it mean that I'm able to see a potential person in the 1% and the 99%, of course, but also the 1%? It's not us versus them. It's awakening this to transform with boldness and with courage this middle space of systems and norms. And this is what Sheikh Turki did when he stood up and spoke. And this is what we've seen in every part of the world. So then I will take you when we are looking at, so we worked on the Arab states in Ethiopia, and our next example will be from another space. But let me just ask you, what does integrity mean to you? And what does it imply for activism today and in future, which is very polarizing, which makes one group wrong and one group is us versus them? How do we stimulate that space? And how does this template enhance accountability in our workplace, in society, and at home? Because every tool is applicable everywhere. So 90 seconds. Okay, so I will take you to the last part, the last thought for this morning. You know, whatever you do, whatever I do today is actually part of a movement at scale. So what does it mean, going to scale? What does it mean? And what are the conventional patterns of scale? One of the biggest challenges in business is to take niche projects to scale, but then they don't focus on this space that is the most beautiful space of ownership and the space of people unfolding their full potential. That's this space within me and you, and the values that you and I stand for and live by in our lives. So what the CFSR model, the one that you saw, and I won't go back to it, but maybe, you know, the 3 circles, the conscious full spectrum model, is the fractal, is the pattern for scale at scale. So what is a fractal? A pattern that repeats itself. The conscious full spectrum response model. So that's the fractal, and that's what's taken our work to scale. And today you can take your work to scale in the same way. So the conventional part is not right or wrong. One of the conventional models of scale is like, you know, Max is a coffee shop in Norway, and Starbucks and McDonald's. I'm not saying which one is healthy and what is not healthy. I'm just saying that there is a model where when you go to Starbucks, you can expect the same coffee. So uniform entities replicated through a financial model. And is that right or wrong? It's neither right nor wrong. I mean, it's great that we have coffee and then there's a financial model behind it. The second is like the university, you know, or education or health. So there are many, many, many schools. So it's a pyramid based on level of technology and science. By technology, I don't mean IT. I mean the technical dimension of any discipline. So the word technology is not understood as just IT. It is much more than IT. So medicine has technological dimensions. You could have used the word, and I could have used the word science based on levels of science, but then science, it's not just science, it's about law as well. So we need many, many, many health centers, many, many schools. And so not everyone from high school will go to a college. So we need fewer colleges or we need fewer hospitals, because a health center can basically manage 80% of ailments. But there are some that they can't, so they send it to a hospital. And then hospitals usually can manage most of it. So do college teach what we need. But some people would like to go to a university for higher education to specialize in some topic related to, let's say, marine biology, or a tertiary hospital related to brain surgery. So this is a second type of how to scale, because you can't have a tertiary hospital and a university in every town in a country. You just won't have enough people. And so that's a second model. There's a third model that which is conventional, are networks and meshworks, but networks and meshworks are value neutral. The internet carries child pornography that increased during the COVID epidemic. And it also carries you and me connecting with each other for value-based work. But the network itself and the meshworks are unregulated. We know from watching the film, The Social Dilemma, suicide rates have gone up. And so when I look at this work, it's vital that we create a different pattern. So nature has patterns, like a fern leaf. Every small piece is the same as this, which is the same as this, which is same as the whole leaf. So today, it is not how big or how small your project is. The question is, how strategic is it? So when I was working in India, for example, the strategy that one of the people who are online with us, Sri Lata, she is working in a university, and she has created, using these tools along with me and her colleague, mental health for self-care, and mental health and well-being for self-care. And so how can we use these tools as a fractal for mobilizing many of the very important things that we are relating to? So she uses the same tools for higher education, for tertiary education, for organizing field work of PhD students. And so for me, it's important to see that it's not just business, it's not just government, it's in different domains, and it's in academia that we can learn and use this. The last example that I will take to complete our journey, maybe I take one. I already took one from Papua New Guinea, which is East Asia. So I will not take another one from East Asia. I'll take one from the western coast, the west coast of the US. And the most beautiful example, I mean, I could take a few, and I'm thinking of which one to take, but let's take the one on violence. And using these tools to address violence, because there were 4 schools in Antioch, and a group of people decided that we will address violence in schools. So from 76% of teen dating violence, that high schoolers, by learning these tools, reduced it within 1 year to 26%. And so basically they went and they advocated. They were part of gangs before, and they went and advocated in Sacramento for having more resources put in their schools, which was taken away, for after-school activities, for sports, which was taken away, for the creative arts, which was taken away. But art and creativity and sports are essential. It's not for schools. And they went and they got the money. So it's possible. And so you see, there are some projects like the school, and there are some big projects that, like the HIV/AIDS project, some at the background, some in the foreground. And it's creating this new field. Good news, when 10% changes, they say the space changes. So this is what you're being invited: an untidy, messy, complex, yet very clear space of how we can move forward in whatever topic you wish to see. So it doesn't matter. I will end pretty much. I think I'm in awe of and I respect so much Dag Hammarskjöld who had a very spiritual dimension. He created the meditation room in the UN Secretariat in New York. If you ever go there, please go and see it. And this quote, I think, is the same as how Mary Jo began with silence. To have humility is to experience reality, not in relation to ourselves, but in its sacred interdependence. It is to see, discern, and act from the point of rest in ourselves. Then how much disappears and all that remains falls into place. In this point of rest at the center of our being, we encounter a world where all things are at rest in the same way. Then a tree becomes a mystery, a cloud, a revelation. Each man, each woman, each person, a cosmos of whose riches we can only catch glimpses. Dag Hammarskjöld in Markings. So over to you, Mary Jo.
Well, thank you so much, Monica, for that amazing lecture, and what a beautiful way to end it with that quote. Well, there's some really interesting questions, that have come forward, and you gave us so much to think about. One person wrote that they were so moved when you said that 92% of people really do believe in fairness. And the question was, if that is true, then what is out of sync that, during these times in the United States, there's such an assault on democracy? It seems like almost 50% of the population doesn't want fairness. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, do you want me to respond, Mary?
Oh, yeah, these are questions that they're inviting me to respond to. Yes.
So this is my point of view. It doesn't mean it is everyone's point of view. So I'll begin first with democracy and how democracy or any ideology is overtaken by ego and the love of power, and is overtaken. The principles of democracy that was meant for everyone is overtaken now. It's become an identity issue, an identity related to power, an identity related to very much how humans, I believe, survived long, long ago, competing with one another. So democracy has become a place of competition. It's become a place of unexamined beliefs. It's become a place where power, external power, not inner power, becomes very, very important. It's in that backdrop that we are having, and that backdrop has been promoted through our, this kind of, the downsides of democracy have been promoted by unending materialism and growth, a distraction towards materialism. So media has played a role. We know that different religions, as different from spirituality, have also sought power, external power. And so we've created a very, an amalgam from different forces, whether it's religiosity, or let's call it religious fundamentalism, or it is the misusing the power of democracy to fatten ourselves or to get something. So to me, it is, how do I go to a deeper question, knowing that today, in today's world, I am subject to information on social media that is poisoned through hatred. And yes, there's also information that is not hatred, but I choose some. How come media and movies have legitimized violence? So James Bond is the hero, he has a gun to kill. So then we have these problems. So to me, unless we create a counterculture of being able to talk about, have dialogues, not on one party or another, but truly on the essence of equity, the essence of dignity. Because how great is it that 92% of Americans believe in fairness? So we are out of sync with our depth and who we are. So to me, it's almost like we could have a webinar on this question, Mary Jo.
It's a huge
What
question.
do you think? What do you think?
Well, I'm just going to share a comment that somebody put in chat, Monica, that I think was interesting. Susan Warfield wrote, there's a difference between believing in fairness for yourself and believing that fairness should be extended to all.
Yes.
And that study does not assess how fairness was defined by those taking it, which I think is a really interesting point. So there's another question.
Mary Jo, is that a good thing to say? She's hit the nail on the head.
Yes.
So
yeah.
therefore, the middle circle of the conscious full spectrum response model.
Exactly.
That's why we need to design differently. I so thank the person who was the person who said this?
I'm a Susan Warfield.
Susan Warfield, thank you. Because that is why that works. So when we know that that works for ourselves, there is something in a human being that breaks open when we are willing to break open our heart, not our head. Mm-hmm. So in another webinar, we'll talk about how breaking open the heart is the source of changing my head.
Yeah.
Meaning the way I think.
Yeah, that's huge. So somebody else said that they found themselves lingering on a phrase that you use and wondering if you would talk about it a little bit more. You talked about hunger is a design defect. And so would you say a little bit more about what you mean?
What I said was what I meant to say is that the persistence of hunger is a defect in the way we've created our design for food. For example, we have practices in the domain of food, which you and I know, Mary, are not healthy, Mary Jo. They are not healthy, but we keep promoting them, right? We even think Coca-Cola is happiness, and we've allowed it to be so for many, many years. And happiness is a profound state of being. So when I say hunger, what I mean is there are 1 billion people who go to bed hungry on the planet. And then my question is, how come we have enough food to feed twice the number of people on the planet? We actually do, if we eat healthy and we eat correct. And we don't subsidize fossil fuel-based food agricultural practices. So we have systems that we have put in place that keep hunger where it is. And to me, I could look at some of these systemic issues. So what do we subsidize in this country? That's the first question. What kind of agriculture do we subsidize? Who gets to get tax breaks because of their once upon a time huge ranch and property was in an agricultural domain? And whereas there are farmers who cannot make it in this country. So another global phenomena. Mm-hmm. So because in this country, a lot of growth is subsidized, like in France, like in Japan, a cotton farmer, this is data from a decade ago, a cotton farmer produced cotton, maybe even 2 decades ago, produced cotton at 70 cents a bushel, and an African farmer at 40 cents a bushel. But in the international market, the African farmer can't sell it. Why? Because the subsidy makes that the American farmer is selling 20 cents a bushel. So there are many rules that keep income, food, genetically modified foods, and pesticides that go with it in place. So the question then is, aren't those systems defects? Mm-hmm. I mean, at one level, let us assume everyone cares that humanity survives beyond profit. beyond profit.
Mm. Lots of comments, and we're going to send them all to you,
Oh,
Monica, in the
lovely.
chat, because you'll really enjoy seeing them. So somebody else writes, there are so many systems that seem incredibly broken, the healthcare system in the United States, for one. How do we even begin thinking about our roles in such broken systems? It feels sometimes just overwhelming.
All right. I'll go back and say, if we track it on the conscious full spectrum model, we can connect big picture to specific action. And there's a worksheet on one page of the book, but let me begin somewhere else. The power dynamics in a classroom in the US or in India or in Europe, the power dynamics in a classroom or the prejudices that manifest in a classroom are the same as in a courtroom, the same prejudice, and the same as in a clinic. So in that middle circle, which is the circle that Susan pointed out, the difference between individual fairness and equity, then the questions in the middle circle are, what system do I wish to change? But not like a huge system. Here is some good news, Mary Jo. A system is interdependent. So I work on one, it'll influence the other. The second is, when I work on systems, then there's a construct called leverage. I enter in a small space, and if I know how to design, I will tweak the whole space. And it is that design ability that is so vital. So I no longer have to think it's huge and I don't know what to do with it. I can see myself as a cultural transformer, as a systems transformer, as you and I do. And then guess what? It takes only 10% of humanity to move to make that change. It'll happen.
That's what gives, I think, me hope. So begin where you are.
Yes.
Look at your own circle of influence and where you can make a difference.
Yes.
So somebody else asked the question, Monica, and thanks you for this wonderful opportunity we've had today. Who are some of the inspirational, radical, transformational leaders today? I mean, who do you look to say, that person's really embodying these values and is, being strategic? Are there some leaders that you could call out that you think fit that?
For me, the leader is in the ordinary person. In the work that I do, I am inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh because I love his engaged Buddhism. I'm inspired by the Jesuits because they serve. I am inspired by, so many of I'm inspired by Swami Vivekananda. I'm inspired by the work of Jesus. I was working in Ethiopia, and one person said, "This is not leadership. This is Christ consciousness." And so for me, I am inspired by so many people, but that's not the space that gives me the joy of every day. It is the unknown heroes of the world that have the courage to stand up and say, I'm going to stop violence. Those teenagers in Antioch who challenged the gangs they worked in and they transformed that space, that's a hero for me. Or that woman in Ethiopia, and there are thousands like that, Mary Jo. Truly. Not yet millions and billions. If we had even 1 billion, we would have peace on the planet. But yeah.
So another person wrote an interesting question. How do we address when there's a change in our values? And I think you could look at that question almost as an individual, but also as a society. And so, how do we deal with that if all of a sudden there's a shift?
So to me, I distinguish values from cultural norms. I think cultural norms move, but values are profound and are anchors to society. And we do not distinguish this space in our language. We choose to mix it up like operational principles. So I'll give you an example, Mary Jo. I was working in the National Park Services in Alaska, and one of the superintendents was an Inuit. And she said, the lower 48s don't understand our values. And I just let that go for a minute. And then during lunch, I sat with her. And this is the same question. Huh? So I said, what's your first, they have 17 values. I said, what's the first value? So the first value that we all learn from childhood is that when there is a storm and it's tough, we will always protect our children and get them to safety. Yes, so that is a value that's universally applicable. It's about caring. And the next one was about elderly people. That's also about caring. It's universally applicable. The third one was they kill seals, and they said, we don't ask, we honor the seal for giving up for life. We don't thank God for the meal. We thank the seal for our meal. And we give the seal water, the thing, and then pray, and then we know we need to eat. Okay, got it. So reverence for life. The fourth value they have is the first oldest son must be a superb hunter because they hunt. And I said, if I take you to Tamil Nadu or to India in places where people are vegetarian, would they teach their first son to hunt? So she said, of course not, because they don't eat meat. I said, then that's a cultural norm. So the need for this society to move away from cultural norms that we keep promoting, from deep values of reverence and respect and dignity, they are all interconnected. And I think learning that difference and working with it is a pathway to really peace and to being able to see each other. And that's what happened with the interfaith work that we did. And one of the imams, who is no longer alive, said, all this time I was told to work on the common ground between religions. Today I know there's a huge difference when I work from the ground of my being, because common ground still upholds ideology. So a little complex, Mary Jo, but a very profoundly deep space.
Mm. When you sort of talk about the different paths and the common source, it reminds me of what the Dalai Lama says, and sometimes people will ask the Dalai Lama and pose questions, such as, is it better to be a Buddhist, or is it better to be, of one type of religion versus another? And the Dalai Lama's response is, pursue the path that will make you a better person.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, a last question that I'm going to ask you, Monica, and that is that somebody talks about how challenging it is in workplaces today. And, do you have some ideas based on the work that you've done in different workplaces? What are some concrete actions that that we can each take to encourage healthy cultures of leadership in our workplaces?
Mary, I think the response for a large, there are a couple of practical things. In a very large organization, you cannot expect the top to move. Different divisions move. So when I'm leading, I'm the director of HIV and AIDS. I'm not the director of UNDP or the executive director. I can still move my place. So to be able to use my influence in where I work. The second is influence is more important in this work than authority, because in the corridors, we have all the conversations. So how do I use influence? The third is I found it very useful to be able to engage in conversations differently, to learn how to speak straightforward. Like the integrity lens is something we use, but I use it for myself in my team. So we are 6 of us, and then I use it for myself. And then everybody uses it for themselves. So we create the culture of transparency. How to create a different culture starts with me. And so to me, the way so one of my colleagues I work with, when we started the work, people came into the course, and I said, "What brought you here?" She said, that was Megan Joseph. She walks into meetings and she holds herself differently in meetings. She has different conversations in meetings. So we wanted to find out, where did she learn this from? And it's in the book 10 Steps of a Transformational Meeting. So to me, it's how to run meetings, how to write emails.
Well, I think the point that you keep making throughout your presentation is that leadership is not just a role, it's a function. And to think that leadership is equated with power is actually the wrong idea. There's incredible power that comes from ideas versus even being in a formal leadership role. And so that just, I think, embraces that message, I think, that you're bringing to us today, that we all have both an opportunity and an accountability, to become activists, in our own spaces. I want to thank you so much, Monica, for being with us today.
Thank you, Mary Jo.
Sharing so much inspiration, and we will be sending you the chat. And as I make my final comments, I'm going to invite people to just even put in the chat one message that they're taking away from today. What's the most important message you're taking away? I want to thank all of our University of Minnesota sponsors who are partners in bringing Dr. Sharma to the University of Minnesota today. And I also want to acknowledge and thank all of our staff at the Bakken Center who helped make today's webinar possible. We hope that you'll join us for the 2023 Wellbeing Series, which will feature topics such as music and well-being, body image, resilience, and well-being and social justice. So it's going to be another wonderful series in 2023. Thank you so much for being with us today, and have a very good rest of the day.
Thank you too.